Humiliated by the Alpha Prince, banished to the frozen wilderness. Claimed by the Alpha King. Chapter 1, Broken Moon, Burning Mark. They made her kneel in the snow to make the humiliation complete. Kora's breath tore from her in white ribbons as the circle of wolves closed. Courtiers watched from the steps of the winter keep, furred cloaks, jeweled collars, eyes sharp with the joy of gossip. Above them, the moon was a blind coin, the storm coming in from the north smelled like iron and rain. The Alpha Prince stood before her, perfect and cruel in ceremonial black. Jordan had kissed her under this same moon 3 nights ago, had whispered mine against her throat, had let her believe in a future that looked like warmth. Now he looked at her as though she were rot. I revoke the claim. His voice carried easily, trained for command. By my word as heir, by the old laws. The bond was a mistake. The bitch carries a defect. Laughter fractured the silence. Somewhere to Kora's left, a woman snorted, an Omega who thinks she can burn like a queen. Kora didn't look at any of them. She stared at the snow. Her palms were bleeding where she'd dug her nails in. The mark at her sternum, the strange, silver-veined sigil that had awakened the night Jordan first touched her, flared once, furious and bright, then guttered low, as if ashamed of itself. You promised, she whispered, voice raw. Jordan's mouth tightened. I promised before I saw what you were. What I am. She looked up, at last. Say it. Cursed, he said, and the second blade slid in, cleaner than the first. The witch marked. The child of flame the priests warned me about. The wind climbed the walls like a beast. The guards shifted, uneasy. Even through the cold, Kora felt the flicker inside her, a match struck in a dark room, small and furious. Child of flame. The title fit like a wound. Release her, Jordan ordered. Let the storm take what I will not. Hands seized her arms. The circle opened. Kora's knees went out from beneath her as they shoved her into the white. For a heartbeat she lay there, cheek in the snow, breath scraping, and knew with animal clarity, if she stayed, she died. If she begged, she died slower. So she stood. No one tried to stop her, rejection was permission. She staggered down the steps, into the mouth of the storm, past the braziers whose flames bent toward her like dogs scenting a secret. Voices chased her, laughter, a hissed prayer, someone spitting witch, and then the wind devoured them all. The world narrowed to dark pines and the thunder of her own pulse. Snow took her footprints as quickly as she made them. The mark at her sternum pulsed hotter, sinking to the storm's rhythm. With each beat, the memory returned, Jordan's hands, his vow, his recoil when the sigil first lit beneath his mouth. Monster, he breathed, not meaning for her to hear. Branches snapped somewhere ahead, heavy and deliberate. Kora went very still. The presence in the dark wasn't palace-trained. It was older. Vast. The wolves in the tree-line didn't growl, they lowered their heads. He stepped out of the snow like a story walking, taller than any man had a right to be, hair iron-dark and threaded with frost, eyes the color of banked coals. The fur mantle across his shoulders was rimed with ice, and power rolled off him in quiet, tidal waves. Not the prince. The king. His gaze found the blood on her wrists, the torn knees, the glow beating under her skin. He inhaled like a verdict. You smell like betrayal, he said, voice deep enough to vibrate the ribs of the earth. And fire. Kora's laugh broke on the edges. Your son sent me to die. A muscle moved in his jaw. He forgets what the storm returns. You should leave, she said, even as everything in her leaned toward him, wolf and woman both recognizing a gravity she could not escape. The court called me cursed. They call lightning a curse when it refuses to obey a rod. He came closer. The air warmed, the braziers behind him flared higher without wind. What is your name? Kora. He tasted it like a prayer and a decision. I am the Alpha King. I know, she said, because the bones know thunder. He looked down at the pulsing sigil at her sternum. The silver flame chose you. No, she said, throat burning. It ruined me. Something like hunger, no, like recognition, moved behind his eyes. He lifted a hand. She didn't flinch, though she should have. King's fingers hovered a breath from the mark, and the heat inside her surged toward his palm as if answering a call. His voice went softer, more dangerous. My son rejects power he cannot master. He met her gaze. I do not. The storm bowed. The wolves lowered further. Come, the Alpha King said. Not a command. A claiming. Be taken from the snow. Kora should have run. Instead, the flame in her reached. And the night changed sides. Chapter 2, The King's Shelter. The storm followed them into the mountains. Kora's limbs had gone past trembling into a kind of hollow weightlessness. She rode slung across the great black wolf's back, fingers tangled in the thick mane, half-conscious. The snow hissed against fur and armor. When she woke, the world was quiet, firelight flickering on stone, a hearth crackling with resin. The scent of pine smoke and wet fur filled the air. She lay beneath a heavy cloak that wasn't hers, the fabric too fine, too warm. You're awake. The voice came from the shadows. He hadn't changed form completely. The wolf still lingered in his posture, shoulders broad, eyes faintly red where human gold should be. Kora sat up slowly, every muscle aching. Why did you bring me here? Because you would have died otherwise, he said simply, stepping closer. And the storm would not return you until I did. Her fingers brushed the mark at her chest. It pulsed once, in answer. You knew what I was. I've seen it before, he said. Long ago. She looked at him sharply. The child of flame? He didn't deny it. The prophecy spoke of fire born in wolf's blood, power strong enough to unmake the chains of the moon. They feared you for good reason. Feared me, she echoed, hollow. Or what I might destroy. His gaze didn't waver. The first fire always destroys before it warms. The words sank deep, unsettling and oddly gentle. He moved to the hearth, stirring the logs. The flames leapt higher, their light spilling over him, his bare arms, the pale scars carved across his chest like history written in flesh. Kora's throat tightened. You look like him, she said. Jordan, he guessed. She nodded. I should, he said. He carries my blood. But not my restraint. The admission landed heavier than she expected. The fire snapped, sparks rose, curling like silver embers toward the ceiling. Why are you helping me? She asked finally. Because I am tired of watching my sons destroy the kingdom I built. He turned to her fully then, and the heat between them changed. It was no longer just the fire's warmth, it was the way his gaze lingered on her mark, the flicker of something ancient recognizing itself in her. You don't even know what you are yet, he said softly. But I do. Kora's pulse kicked. And what am I? His lips curved, almost cruel, almost kind. Mine, if you'll have it. She froze. He took a slow step toward her. Not as property, he said. As the fire that will burn beside me. For a moment, the wind outside howled, like laughter, like warning. The silver flame in her chest responded, bright enough to paint the stone walls with light. Kora stood. You can't claim what's already been rejected. His eyes gleamed. Then let me teach you how rejection becomes power. And before she could protest, the Alpha King reached out, not touching her skin, only her flame, and the world folded in fire. Chapter 3. The flame within. The fire didn't burn her. It consumed everything else, the ache in her limbs, the memory of Jordan's betrayal, the sting of snow and shame. When it cleared, she stood in a place that was not the mountain hall. The air shimmered gold and silver. Beneath her feet stretched endless water, black and still as glass. The king stood a few paces away, his cloak gone, his expression unreadable. Where are we? She asked. He tilted his head slightly. Inside the flame. She turned slowly. The horizon glowed faintly, not with dawn, but with power, threads of molten light moving under the surface like veins in living stone. This is, inside me? In both of us. His voice echoed, deep and soft, as though the space itself listened to him. When I touched your mark, the bond answered. I didn't expect it to take us this far. Kora's hand went to her sternum. The silver sigil was a steady pulse now, bright enough to hurt the eyes. Then take us back. He stepped closer. You think it's that simple? Her heartbeat stuttered. You brought me here. Your flame brought me, he said. And it won't let me go until it's done showing you the truth. He reached out, not with hands this time, but with something deeper. Energy moved between them, old as moonlight, raw as blood. The space between them folded like breath drawn in, and suddenly she saw a field of burning wolves beneath a shattered sky, the moon torn in half, a woman of silver fire walking unafraid through ruin. Kora gasped. That's the first child of flame, he said quietly. Your ancestor. My mother's doom. The vision broke apart. Kora swayed, dizzy with heat and memory. Then this power, it's cursed. It's choice, he said. It can unmake. Or it can change. His gaze lingered on her as he said it, and the air thickened again. The pull between them was no longer just power. It was hunger, recognition that went deeper than flesh. Why do I feel this? She whispered. He exhaled through his teeth. Because the flame remembers its first king. She stared at him, stunned. You think this is fate? I think fate is the excuse of those afraid to choose. He closed the last of the distance between them, his breath warm against her skin. You could burn me alive right now, little one. So tell me, why don't you? The flame under her skin surged upward, fierce and bright. She wanted to step back, to break the connection, but the fire knew him. It wanted him. Her voice trembled. Because I don't want you dead. For the first time, something like a smile touched his mouth. Good. Then we have the beginning of a truce. The light around them began to dim. The reflection of the king's eyes, gold, steady, impossibly ancient, was the last thing she saw before the world snapped back into stone and smoke. Kora stumbled, caught herself on the edge of the hearth. The fire burned low again, ordinary, mortal. The king stood across from her, breathing as though he'd just returned from a battle. He looked at her the way men look at omens, half in awe, half in fear. Now you know what you carry. Kora met his gaze. And what happens if I can't control it? His answer was quiet, almost reverent. Then I burn with you. Chapter 4, Lessons in Fire. Dawn came to the mountains like a bruise. Pale light poured through narrow slits in the stone, gilding the frost and turning the air to smoke. Kora sat cross-legged before the hearth, palms open, the silver mark on her chest still glowing faintly. Every time she breathed, sparks lifted from her skin and vanished. The king watched from the archway, arms folded. In daylight he looked less like myth, more like a man, still dangerous, but real enough to cast a shadow. Again, he said. Kora frowned. You said the flame would sleep at sunrise. It sleeps when you command it, not when the sky does. He crossed the floor, crouched beside her. Feel it. Don't force it. Fire doesn't obey fear. She exhaled slowly. The glow brightened, then flared too hard, cracking the stone beneath her hands. He caught her wrist before she could recoil. Control. Her pulse jumped. You said not to fear it. And I said not to feed it either. His grip was steady, his thumb pressed against the inside of her wrist. You have to choose the heat, not drown in it. Something in his tone made her stomach twist, not harsh, not tender, something balanced perfectly between the two. She pulled free. And how exactly does a king know how to master fire? He straightened, gaze steady. Because I learned to survive it. The first child of flame burned half my mother's line before she learned mercy. I studied what she left behind. Kora looked up sharply. So you do believe I'll destroy you? He hesitated. I believe you could. And you still brought me here. I've never trusted safety, he said simply. It breeds weakness. The silence that followed was too intimate. The fire crackled, casting gold on his jaw, on the faint scar that ran from temple to throat. Kora turned away first. Your son called me a curse. Jordan calls anything stronger than him a curse. Her mouth twitched before she could stop it. He said I was beneath the throne. The king's eyes narrowed. Then it's fitting that the throne now bends toward you. She looked back at him, startled, angry, uncertain all at once. Don't say things like that. Why? Because I might start to believe you. He smiled faintly, and the heat between them shifted again. Not dangerous, not yet, but alive. They trained until her arms trembled, until she could hold the flame in her palm without splitting stone. When exhaustion finally claimed her, she collapsed onto the furs by the hearth. The king poured water into a cup and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed, nothing deliberate, nothing innocent. You learn fast, he said. Kora managed a laugh. I learned to survive fast. He studied her for a long moment, then said quietly, survival isn't enough anymore. Not for what's coming. What is coming? He looked toward the window where snow still fell. The council knows my son failed the claiming. They'll want to cleanse the bloodline. They'll come for you, and for me. Then we run, she said. He shook his head. No. We burn back. Kora met his gaze. Together? Something fierce sparked in his eyes. If you'll stand with me. Her heart beat once, hard. Then teach me to be the storm. The Alpha King nodded slowly, the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. Then, little flame, let the world prepare. Outside, thunder rolled. The snow began to melt. Chapter 5, Fire and Crown. The mountains didn't stay quiet for long. By the end of the week, messengers had reached the keep, wolves in the king's colors, breathless from the climb, bringing word that the council had called an emergency gathering. The palace was in uproar. The prince had vanished 2 nights earlier. Kora listened from the upper corridor as the king paced the hall below, his lieutenants waiting in silence. His voice was low but cold enough to frost the air. Search the northern forests, he ordered. If Jordan's alive, I want him found before the council makes him a weapon. One of the soldiers hesitated. Majesty, they say he was last seen near the witch camps. That he. Say it, the king snapped. The soldier swallowed. That he seeks the child of flame. Kora stepped into the light. Then he's already too late. Every head turned. The wolves bowed instinctively, but the tension in the air didn't ease. The king's gaze found her, sharp as ever, though something softer flickered behind it. Dismissed, he said, and when the soldiers were gone, his voice dropped. You shouldn't walk into council rumors. I've lived my whole life in them, she said, coming down the steps. If your son wants me, he'll find more than he remembers. He studied her, bare feet, loose hair, the faint silver glow threading through her skin. You've changed. I'm not the girl who begged him to love me, she said. I'm the flame he tried to bury. He didn't smile. He looked proud. Then stand beside me tomorrow when the council comes. Let them see what they fear. You'd make me your weapon? He shook his head slowly. My equal. Kora hesitated, every instinct pulling her in 2 directions, fear and desire, memory and rebirth. But she saw the truth in his eyes, not possession, not pity, but recognition. I don't belong to you, she said quietly. No, he agreed, taking a step closer. But you belong with me. The words shouldn't have landed the way they did. She should have resisted. Instead, the world seemed to tilt toward him, the scent of smoke and cedar, the low heat of his power curling through the room. "Careful," she whispered. "You speak like a man who's already chosen his ruin." He smiled faintly. "I have." The storm broke that night. Rain hammered the stone roofs, thunder rolling like distant drums. In the war room, maps scattered across the table, the king traced the northern borders while Kora leaned beside him, the two of them haloed by firelight. "Your power can shield the keep," he said, "but it needs a focus." She glanced at the candle between them, flames swaying in the draft. "A tether?" He nodded. "A conduit strong enough to anchor your flame to mine." "And how does one make a conduit, Majesty?" He looked up, eyes molten. "The old way." The meaning settled between them like a heartbeat. A bond wasn't just magic, it was intimacy, power shared through will and touch. Kora's breath caught. "You'd risk that?" "I already have," he said. "The moment I carried you from the snow." Lightning flashed outside, throwing their shadows across the walls, hers slender, his broad, the two merging into one. When she reached out, her hand didn't shake. The air pulsed as her flame met his, white and gold colliding. The world flared, then steadied. Kora felt the link snap into place, deep as marrow. His thoughts brushed hers, his heartbeat echoing faintly inside her own. He inhaled sharply. "You feel it too." "Yes," she said. "And now we burn together." Chapter 6, The Council of Wolves. The great hall of the Moon Citadel had never felt colder. The banners above the marble floor hung limp in the stale air, the gold crest of the royal line dulled to tarnish. The king's throne gleamed at the far end of the chamber, empty, for now. Kora stood beside the hearth, her cloak drawn close. Outside, the last of the storm raged against the high windows, but inside the tension was tighter than any wind. "They'll smell me," she said quietly. The king's voice, low and steady, came from the dais steps. "Then let them." He wore no crown, just black armor trimmed with fur, the faint sheen of gold threading through the scars on his neck. The mark of their new bond pulsed faintly at his collarbone. Kora tried to slow her breathing. The silver in her blood was awake, restless. Every whisper beyond the door made her flame twitch. The guards swung the doors wide. The council entered in their jeweled finery, wolves disguised as noblemen, their eyes bright and hungry. "Your Majesty," intoned Lord Helvar, bowing too deeply. "We thank you for granting audience on such urgent matters." The king took his seat. "Urgency has become our kingdom's favorite disease." Another lord, younger and sharper, stepped forward. "The matter is the missing prince." "Missing?" The king's tone cut the word apart. "Or fled?" The lord faltered. "There are troubling reports that he hunts a woman. The witch marked Omega." The chamber rippled with murmurs. Kora kept her head down, pulse hammering. Helvar cleared his throat. "We have reason to believe she hides in these mountains. That she seduced the prince with dark power, perhaps even ensnared the king himself." The king rose so suddenly the nearest guards flinched. "Choose your next words carefully." "Majesty," Helvar said, voice trembling but eyes gleaming, "the people whisper. They say you've taken the witch into your halls. That her fire spreads in your blood." Kora lifted her gaze. The room dimmed around her as her flame stirred, heat rising like breath before a shout. "She stands before you," the king said. The council erupted, gasps, curses, the scrape of chairs. Kora stepped into the open, pulling back her hood. The silver sigil at her sternum glowed like a living star. Lord Helvar stumbled backward. "Gods protect us." "She needs no gods," the king said. "You would crown a curse," another voice spat. He looked to Kora. "Show them what curse they fear." Her chest tightened. She wanted to run, but the bond between them pulsed, steady and strong. "You're not alone," his voice whispered through it. Kora spread her hands. The fire came easily this time, not a blaze of destruction, but a ring of pale flames circling the council's feet. The heat didn't burn. It revealed. The lords gasped as the light caught their eyes, the truth surfacing, hidden symbols of rebellion inked on their wrists, silver dust for poison glittering on their cuffs. Kora's voice carried, calm and terrible. You accuse me of corruption, yet you stand marked by treachery. Who serves the greater fire now? Helvar fell to his knees. She's a demon. No, the king said, descending the dais. She's my consort. The chamber froze. Kora turned to him sharply. You're what? He didn't blink. If they want to name you, let it be as my equal, not my enemy. Her heart thudded. The council erupted again, shouts and snarls, the sound of centuries of law fracturing. Silence, the king thundered, and even the flames obeyed. He looked at them all, the old wolves, the trembling traitors, the fearful loyalists, and then at her. This is the power you tried to cage. You'll either kneel to it or be consumed by it. Kora's fire flared in time with his words, spreading up the pillars, licking the carved moon sigils above. From the far side of the room, the doors slammed open. Then you'll burn with her, came a voice Kora knew too well. Jordan. The prince strode in, armor dark with soot, eyes rimmed red. My father, he said coldly, you stole what was mine. Kora's hand went to her mark. The flame inside her surged, answering the echo of his power, similar to the king's, but colder, brittle. You forfeited her when you called her cursed, the king said. Jordan's smile was all teeth. Then let's see whose claim the goddess honors. He drew his sword, the blade etched with runes older than both their bloodlines. The firelight caught on it, silver, hungry. Kora stepped forward, fire racing under her skin. You'll regret this, Jordan. Not as much as you will, he hissed. And the sun lunged at the father, steel meeting fire as prophecy came roaring to life. Chapter 7, Blood and Flame. The impact shook the hall. Steel hit stone. Fire met shadow. The runes on Jordan's blade howled with cold light, cutting through Kora's flame as though slicing a river in half. Sparks spun into smoke. The king parried the first strike easily, but the second carved through his guard and slammed into his shoulder. Blood bloomed dark against his armor. The scent hit Kora like iron lightning. Stop, she cried, but neither man heard her. Father and son circled the throne room, wolves in human skin. Jordan's face was pale with fury. You took her from me. The king's voice was ice. I rescued her from you. She was mine. She was never yours. Kora's fire swelled, threads of silver heat crawling up her arms, reacting to their anger like a storm reacting to thunder. The mark on her chest burned, no longer steady but frantic, alive and panicked, like it recognized its own undoing. Jordan swung again. The king caught the blade between his palms. The sound was unbearable, steel against flesh, flesh against will. Flame bled from the edges of the sword and climbed the metal like ivy. Enough, the king said, voice low and commanding. You're not my enemy, boy. Jordan's jaw tightened. Then why does the goddess call your name instead of mine? The king's eyes flickered gold. Because she only calls for those who answer. Jordan's laugh was bitter. Then let's see if she answers this. He twisted his wrist, slicing the king's hand open, and the blade's runes flared brighter, feeding on royal blood. The hall shook. The council fled, leaving only the three of them in the firestorm. Kora moved before she could think. Her flame erupted, a pillar of white gold cutting between them. The heat knocked Jordan backward. The runes on his sword dimmed. She turned on him, eyes blazing. You said I was cursed, but look at yourself. You're burning in jealousy and calling it justice. Jordan snarled. You've bewitched him. You've bewitched everything. Maybe I reminded him what power looks like when it isn't afraid. He lunged again, and this time she met him. Her palm caught the flat of the blade. Fire poured through the metal, racing down to the hilt, and exploded outward. Jordan screamed as the sword shattered into 100 molten shards. The light flared so bright that the world went white. When it cleared, Jordan was on his knees. Smoke rose from the cracks in his armor. His wolf eyes flickered, anger, confusion, sorrow. Kora stood over him, trembling, the silver flame dancing wild across her skin. "You were supposed to protect your people," she said softly. He looked up, voice raw. "Then finish it." Kora hesitated. Every instinct told her to end it. But the king's hand closed around her wrist, firm and grounding. "No," he said. "That's not the fire you carry." Her gaze met his, and in that instant, the prophecy shifted. She saw it, not in words, but in vision. The moon cracking open, the wolves kneeling in light, her flame dividing in two, one hand raised in destruction, the other in mercy. The child of flame will choose what the world becomes. She drew a deep, shaking breath. "You're right." The fire around her dimmed, softening to a glow. She reached down and pressed her burning palm against Jordan's chest, not to kill, but to cleanse. The silver light spread through him, scouring the darkness, leaving him gasping and human. When she stepped back, the mark on her chest dimmed for the first time in days. The king stood beside her, bleeding, proud. "You've rewritten the prophecy." "No," she whispered. "I just refuse to repeat it." The storm outside broke, the moon splitting through the clouds, whole again, no longer red. Jordan looked up at them both, eyes clear now, voice small. "What happens to me?" Kora glanced at the king, then back at him. "You learn to live with what you lost." He nodded, shoulders heavy, and turned away. When the door closed behind him, the silence left in his wake was enormous. Kora turned to the king, her voice a whisper. "You're hurt." He caught her chin gently, even as blood dripped down his arm. "You burned a prophecy tonight, little flame. I can bleed for that." She smiled faintly. "I didn't burn it." Her fingers traced the air, where embers still hung like stars. "I rewrote it in fire." He leaned closer, his breath warm against her temple. "Then may the world learn to read your language." And in that ruined hall, surrounded by ash and moonlight, their bonds settled, no longer a sin, no longer a secret. Just two wolves, crowned by fire. Chapter 8, Crown of Ash and Dawn. The battle left more silence than victory. By morning, the moon citadel was half ruin, the air still heavy with the scent of charred stone and rain. The council chambers had collapsed into themselves, the rebellion that had been festering beneath their marble floors was gone, burned out by the same fire they'd sought to weaponize. Kora stood at the balcony's edge, overlooking the valley. The forest below steamed under the newborn sun, the snow melted to mist. The wolves in the distance moved like rivers of silver and gray, restless but alive. Behind her, the king's footsteps were slower than usual. His arm was still wrapped in linen, blood seeping through where the blade had cut deepest. "You should be in bed," she said without turning. "I've ruled from worse wounds." "That's not something to brag about," she murmured. He came to stand beside her. The wind caught the edge of his cloak and tangled it around hers, two dark banners merging into one shape. His gaze swept the valley, his kingdom, their cost. "You spared my son," he said quietly. "I spared myself." He looked at her sharply. "Explain." She exhaled, her breath visible in the cold. "Killing him would have made me exactly what the prophecy wanted, a weapon shaped by fear. The world already has enough of those." He studied her a moment longer, then nodded. "You sound like a queen." She shook her head. "I'm not." "You will be," he said simply, "because I won't have the throne rot beneath the weight of another king." Her heart stuttered. "You'd give me the crown?" "I'd share it," he said, voice steady, gaze unwavering. "The throne should no longer rule through blood alone. The flame chose you." Let the wolves see what fire and crown can build together. She turned to face him fully, the light painting his scars gold. If I say yes, it changes everything. That's the point, he said, a wry twist at his mouth. Silence settled, warm despite the wind. She reached up, brushed her thumb across the line of his jaw, tracing the edge of a man who'd spent a lifetime fighting against gods and ghosts. You're bleeding on your promise again. He caught her hand and kissed her palm. Then I'm making it true. When he kissed her lips next, it wasn't possession. It was recognition. The kind of kiss that said we've already survived everything else. The bond between them pulsed once, brighter than ever before, and spread outward. Every wolf in the kingdom lifted its head as the magic rippled through the land, a wave of silver and gold light that sank into the soil and sky. Below, the forests flared briefly with warmth. The fires that had once devoured now healed. The child of flame, he murmured against her hair. The prophecy said she would either destroy or deliver. You've done both. Kora smiled faintly. Maybe the goddess should write clearer endings. She leaves that to the ones who survive, he said. They stood there for a long while, watching the valley breathe again. The sun climbed higher, burning away the fog. Kora took a slow breath and felt no fear, no curse, only power, anchored and alive. The flame didn't own her anymore. It answered her. She turned to him. What will you call this new reign? He smiled. The Age of Flame. She laughed quietly. Too obvious. Then name it yourself. Kora's eyes found the horizon, where light met shadow in a seamless line. The dawn pact, she said. Let it mean that even those burned by the past can stand in the light again. He nodded once. Then let it begin. And as the bells rang from the tower, low, solemn, hopeful, the wolves howled not in mourning, but in renewal. Kora lifted her chin, the mark at her sternum glowing soft silver in the morning light. No longer cursed. No longer hidden. The child of flame had become its keeper. And beside her, the Alpha King bowed not to power, but to the woman who had taught him its price. Epilogue. The whisper beneath the moon. The moon rose quiet that night. No blood-red omen, no trembling sky, just a clean silver circle reflected in the waters below the citadel. For the first time in generations, the wolves sang not to beg for mercy, but to celebrate their own survival. Kora walked alone through the outer courtyard. The old scars of battle were gone, replaced by gardens that bloomed even in frost. Blue fire lilies, resurrected from the ashes of the rebellion, lined the paths. Their light pulsed faintly when she passed, drawn to the heartbeat of the woman who had once burned kingdoms. The flame within her had changed. It no longer roared, no longer demanded blood. It lived in her like breath, part of her pulse, part of her calm. Behind her, the heavy doors creaked open. She didn't have to turn to know who it was. You never sleep, she said. The king's laugh was low. Neither do you. He joined her at the edge of the garden, cloak brushing the stones. His wounds had healed into pale silver scars, shimmering faintly under the moonlight. The council meets tomorrow, he said. They want to draft the new laws. Let them, Kora said, her voice soft but firm. We gave them peace. Now they have to build it. He nodded, then looked down at her. And you? You've been too quiet. She smiled faintly. Listening. To what? The goddess. That caught him off guard. She still speaks to you? Kora's gaze went distant, the flame in her eyes reflecting the moon's edge. Not in words. In memory. In warmth. She says the world is still learning how to forgive itself. He studied her face, serene, fierce, weary, luminous. Does she ever rest? She only rests when we do, Kora said, and for once, the words didn't sound like prophecy. They sounded like truth. He reached out, threading his fingers through hers. Then maybe we start tonight. They walked in silence along the edge of the reflecting pool. The wind carried the scent of pine and snowmelt, the faint hum of distant wolves bedding down in peace. When they stopped, he said quietly, "Do you ever miss what came before?" She shook her head. "No. I pity it." He smiled. "Spoken like a queen." She turned to him, eyes steady. "No. Spoken like a survivor." They stood beneath the full moon until its reflection touched both their feet, and in that light the world seemed to exhale. The goddess's whisper, faint as wind, curled through the stillness. "The flame was never meant to destroy," it said, "only to remind the dark that it cannot last forever." Kora looked up. "Then let the dark remember." The king bent and kissed her, gentle and final, sealing what neither throne nor prophecy could undo. Far below, the wolves howled their last song of the night, a sound not of mourning, but of promise. And when dawn came again to the moon's citadel, it did not rise over a kingdom ruled by blood or fear. It rose over two figures standing hand in hand, a crown of flame and frost between them. The world, at last, belonged to those who had learned how to burn without being consumed. The end.